This is the second part of a video that I uploaded recently, the first of which was series that you can binge this upcoming year. All of the series are ones that are getting their conclusions in 2025, so that maybe it's now the right time to pick it up and read it all the way through for the first time. In that video, they were series that I was already currently reading, and in this video, I'm going to be sharing series that I have not yet picked any book up from, but that I am definitely considering now that they're getting their conclusion. We often only hear about the start of series and not necessarily when the sequels or conclusions are published. So if you happen to know of a series that is getting a conclusion in 2025 and I haven't included it in this list or in my past video, put it in the comment section down below, and that way it can be a resource for other people who are finding this video, who are hoping to check out series, or who particularly like to read completed series so that they can go all the way through and know that they're going to get an ending. The first series that I want to highlight begins with the book The Judas Blossom, and this is the Nightingale and the Falcon trilogy. The third and final book is coming out in May of 2025. This is a historical fantasy that is inspired by, I believe, the heirs or the sons of Genghis Khan, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that right. I've actually heard it pronounced a couple different ways, and I am not a history buff, so I don't know the proper one there. For each book, I'm going to tell you what I know about it, read maybe a little bit of the synopsis, and then leave it for you guys in the comments if you have read any books in this series to fill in information on this one. I will say that I've heard that this one is like a little bit of a sleeper favorite, that it didn't have a huge impact at the time, but that it is actually a really, really good historical fantasy representation. This is an imaginative and sprawling epic fantasy reimagining of the Mongol Empire's invasion of Persia, following the lives and treacherous journey of four key figures in the heart of war. I think this is set in the time period after the death of Genghis Khan, when his vast empire is, rather than inherited by a single son, is divided amongst his four sons. We are following, I think, one of the sons, one of the wives of one of the sons, and a Persian rebel, I believe. And this is a historical fantasy that is focusing on the political strife, the campaigns, the sieges, and political tension of this changing time period when you have a vast empire that is divided, with different goals from each of those brothers who inherited this space. The brothers Gwyn are huge reps for this series. They really, really loved it and enjoyed it. And I definitely feel like they have a bit of an edge when it comes to assessing and critiquing historical fantasy books. So I am definitely curious about picking this one up. I have kind of always had my mind on The Judas Blossom. And again, the third and final book is coming out in May of 2025. Another trilogy that is concluding in May begins with the book The Sword Defiant. This is the Lands of the Firstborn trilogy. This is a book that I personally have had my eye on, and so I've wanted to read it for a really long time. It's just been a matter of getting access to it. So in 2025, I personally plan to pick up at least the first book, The Sword Defiant. And this one is a heroes after the fact story where we have like a pretty classic setup of like a group of 9 people who save the world from some evil dark lord kind of a thing. And we are catching up with them decades, I think, later. Our one main character that we are focusing on, Sir Alfric, finds that some of his past companions have not exactly aged well and might in fact have become monsters themselves. I think we also get the perspective of either his sister or something like that. It's not just his perspective. Judith from the channel Dead Good Book Reviews is a huge proponent for this book and this series, so I'm looking forward to finally picking up the first book and hopefully continuing on with the series. Then in June, we are getting the conclusion to the series that begins with Engines of Empire. Personally, I actually picked this book up when it first came out in 2022, and it just was not a huge success and a hit for me in the time. I actually ended up DNFing it. However, I have always thought that maybe it was one of those ones, it's just not the right time for when I picked it up, because it had a lot of the right components for me, and that is that it is following a guild family. In this world, we are following families that run different guilds. It is sort of like a fantasy and technology kind of meeting of a world, and we are following each of the different members of this family, including the matriarch. And at the beginning of the book, they sort of all get pulled in different directions. It definitely feels like there is not only some family drama, but as well as like political tension and drama and, you know, machinations amongst the various family guilds. Elle from the channel Elliot Brooks is always pushing this book as something that is really a series that is really, really underhyped, and I am definitely thinking about giving it another go now that we are getting the conclusion. You can kind of watch to see what the response is, how happy people are with the conclusion. If you like big mech suits, if you like technology meeting fantasy and the complications therein or the intricacies therein, as well as family drama, then this is perhaps one to be picking up and reading through this year. I have 2 series that are going to be getting their conclusions in July, the first of which even is only a duology, so that's also really, really great, something that you can easily pick up, read 2 books, and check off another series. And this one, I think the marketing suffered a little bit from what is and isn't romantasy. I think the first book was on the Goodreads romantasy the first year that it came out, or perhaps, but there's been a lot of debate around this book and around like what makes something fully romantasy and what makes something fantasy with a romantic subline. So I think perhaps it is possible that this book just hasn't found the right crowd with the right expectations for the romance, and that is the Jasad Heir, the Scorched Throne duology. This one has kind of a classic setup where we have a ruling magical family that was overthrown 10 years ago. Magic is outlawed and all of the royal family were killed except for that one child that secretly got away. We are following that main character. I imagine that this is a dual POV, that we're also getting the love interest perspectives, but I'm not certain about that. And I think that she gets found out by the current ruling people and this one particular captain kind of guy, let's say. But when she gets found out, she is then kind of forced to work with her enemies, like the new ruling family, to try to lure out the rebels who are still kind of like fighting on her family's behalf. So it's definitely like some complicated enemies or hate to love or something in that realm of like star-crossed, where whether or not they like each other at the beginning, they're definitely like not supposed to be together. So that is the setup here. And again, it is only a duology. It says here, in this Egyptian-inspired debut fantasy, a fugitive queen strikes a deadly bargain with her greatest enemy and finds herself embroiled in a complex game that could resurrect her scorched kingdom or leave it in ashes forever. So I do feel like that's a very classic setup. That's definitely how I thought when I first heard about this book when it came out in 2023. And I just think that it's going to really depend on what your expectations are in terms of romance, and maybe that's why it hasn't kind of found its right readers, depending on what you expect and whether or not you believe this is to be romantasy going into it or just fantasy with romance. We'll see where it falls on the line. I'm definitely looking to pick this one up at some point this year. The other series that I mentioned was also getting its conclusion in July is the book Darkwater Daughter and the series The Winter Seas. This is definitively a fantasy romance book from what I'm aware, and I believe it is a pirate romantasy book on top of that. A storm singer and a pirate hunter join forces against a deathless pirate lord in this swashbuckling Jacobean adventure on the high seas. Mary Firth is a storm singer, a woman whose voice can still hurricanes and shatter armadas. Faced with servitude to a pirate lord, she offers her skills to his arch rival in exchange for protection instead. Samuel Rosser is a disgraced naval officer serving aboard the Heart, an infamous privateer commissioned to bring the pirate lord to justice. Driven into the eternal ice at the limits of the world, Mary and Samuel must choose their loyalties and battle forces older and more powerful than the pirates who would make them slaves. Okay, so it's maybe not actually a pirate romantasy, it is a pirate hunting romantasy. Come sail the winter sea for action-packed, high-stakes adventures, rich characterization, and epic plots full of intrigue and betrayal. And you can start that and read all the way through into July when the conclusion is coming out. The final series that I'm going to be sharing on this list started with the first book, The Art of Prophecy, and this is the War Art series, which is getting its third and final book in August of this year. This one does sound really, really interesting, but I've always hesitated because there's an element of humor to it, which is going to be really, really hit or miss depending on what your personal taste in humor is. I'll read a little blurb here. An epic fantasy ode to martial arts and magic, the story of a spoiled hero, an exacting grandmaster, and an immortal god king, from the New York Times bestselling author of The Lives of Tao. So this is a mentor-mentee story where we are following a prophesied hero, but because he has always been prophesied to be the hero, he has actually grown up as rather like a spoiled brat who nobody is taking the time to train properly because they never want him to be hurt or to be injured in training. So then we have a hero who in fact is not really all that prepared to save the world, and so steps in our Grandmaster Taishi, who shows up and finds a spoiled brat unprepared to face his destiny. And she decides that this is like a no-nonsense approach is needed to whip this hero, potential hero, into shape. And I definitely have heard that we explore the idea of like, is the prophecy true? Is this guy really the hero? So there's always some really interesting elements with that, with prophecy chosen ones and the way in which civilization or the people surrounding that prophesied one choose to react to the person. I have always been interested in reading this one, and I feel like partway through, first hearing about it, I was already adding it to my want to read shelves when the humor was brought up, and I feel like depending on everybody's personal taste, that's going to be really, really hit or miss. So I think this is one where I plan to, rather than commit to definitely reading the first book, I'm going to maybe do a sample and see if I can get on with the humor, if it's going to work for me, and we'll go from there. So again, the third book is coming out in August, and that is the War Arts trilogy. So there we have another video with a list of some series that are getting their conclusions this year. Don't forget my other video, the part 1 to this one, where I share several more series that are finishing this year. They just happen to be ones that I have already started. Put down in the comments down below if you know of some more series that are going to be wrapping up in 2025. Maybe do a little tidbit, a little keywords pitch in the comments so that others can use this as a resource in trying to decide which books they'd like to pick up finally and read all the way through. If you enjoy what I do here, don't forget to like, subscribe, or comment. It really helps the channel out. And I'll see you guys next time. Have a great day. Bye.